Hey everyone, Ariel Adams here with the Superlative podcast. Please listen to the other aBlogtoWatch podcast, aBlogtoWatch Weekly, where we talk about the latest watch news and reviews. Today on Superlative, my guest is once again Mitch Katz. Mitch is a watch collector and now I guess a two-time author. You're working on number 3. We're still trying to figure out how to title you, right?
I have no idea. This all came out of, I don't know what. This has been surprising to me as it has been to a number of other people who know me.
I think what I find fascinating is that 20 years ago, when I started being into watches roughly, it was more than that, there was no real other ways of manifesting your hobby than just buying and wearing a watch. Now, because of how, I guess, robust and dynamic the community has gotten, you can have a blossoming writing career backboned by your interest in the hobby. And it's not like I've seen car guys been like, I'm going to start to write like car novels. Like, it's a very interesting thing within watch space, right?
Well, it's certainly a small niche kind of idea, but it all started with writing the first book.
Yeah.
The first book I wrote really ostensibly for my kids. I mean, that came out of watch collecting. The book, Time on My Hands, is really my journey, and it was written specifically for my kids so they would understand what I was about, what the collection was about, what I have and why I have it. But along the way, a friend of mine said, why don't you write murder mysteries involving watches? It's like, okay, that's kind of goofy. And he and I both read the same sort of novels, have the same kind of interests, and mystery stories are one of them. And it just sat with me, and it was like, okay. And it just must have been cooking. And I was going about writing the first book. And that makes sense. I mean, that's a book about collecting. That's a book really involving watches. And to your point, it was as it turned out, a relatively rare look into the world of collecting from the collector's side rather than the side of the companies, the watchmakers, the brands, whatever. Anyway. And along the lines, we were out going for dinner on Mother's Day, as it turned out. And it was like I walked through a portal. We were walking across the street to the restaurant, and I said, I got it. My wife said, what do you got? I said, I got a plot for a novel. Really? Yeah. And we spent the evening celebrating my wife's motherhood, talking about the plot for the first novel. And it's taken off from there.
Did she enjoy that? Was that a good Mother's Day celebration?
We actually spent the evening talking about that book. Yeah, she was very engaged. And we actually talked about another nonfiction book that someday I'd like to write as well.
Now, during the writing process, was she someone, I know you have obviously high trust in her, is she someone that you bounced ideas off of, had her read drafts, or was it something you kept relatively private and maybe just with a third-party editor?
Oh, no, she's a big-time partner in this process.
Okay.
Actually in both books, I would write a certain number of pages. In this case, now that we're into this kind of routine, I'll write about 20 pages and then give it to her. And she gets ticked off almost every time because she said, and then what? And I won't tell her. I'm in the process of writing the third novel, and I already know who the killer is, but I won't tell her.
So let's back up for those of you who are sort of finding yourself a little lost in the conversation. Mitch had come on the show to talk about the book that he wrote about his own collection. And I think the thing that I thought was so impressive about that was, here's someone who has an impressive collection of timepieces, who's also creating an impressive database around their timepieces. The collection is vividly enhanced, in my opinion, and this goes for anyone's collection, if the person who made the collection documents what they like about the watches, why they're important, and some details around getting them. So in that sense, I thought that was a fantastic journey as a collector, obviously all nonfiction. And now your second book, Time Eternal, is, a murder mystery, but sort of framed with you living and breathing the watch collecting world for a number of years. And this is an entirely different type of project. They're both books, but this is your first storybook. And, I didn't finish it. You sent it to me about a week ago, so I'm not that fast of a reader, but I'm more than halfway through. I'm on page like 240 or something like that. And it's interesting how you say you did this with your wife, because I'm realizing when you write a book, especially a storybook, it's like I was looking into your head. I was like, oh my God, I see inside of Mitch's mind as I'm reading the story, because it's so much of you. And I can imagine in the highly personal dynamic, which is a husband and wife, parts of yourself may get exposed through that never really come up in daily conversation or interactions, right?
Well, I'm not, to a certain extent, you cannot divorce what's going on between the ears from what comes out of the fingers. You can't. It's all part and parcel to you. And I couldn't write a novel about, computers, because I don't know enough about computers to do that. So, the interest in me was, this is another way of having fun with the world of watches. And each novel starts with a story that actually occurred or occurs in the world of watches. And it's different views of it. And there's a little bit about watches in there, but you certainly don't need to know a lot about watches to read the novel. I mean, it's a story, to your point.
Absolutely. I just think if you are a watch lover, there's a bunch of, we'll call them Easter eggs or fun in there. And that's what I liked about it. You're right. It's totally accessible. I really like it, actually. I mean, I wasn't trying to push myself to go through it. I've been enjoying taking time to read it. That's hard for me to do. Acknowledging that you are not a career, writer, not a career author who's a multiple novelist who's been doing this for a long time. What you did was extremely, extremely hard work. And that, how hard it was. You knew exactly what you were setting yourself forth. But as a watch lover, it's very rare to see that level of your hobby in a conversation, which is a story about a murder mystery thriller. They're not usually together. It's kind of delightful. And was it delightful to you? I'm guessing you liked the genre, the murder mystery genre. It would be surprising to me if this is not a genre you had been reading for a lot of your life.
I have. Agatha Christie got me through medical school. Anytime there was an exam coming up, I'd read a novel because it would kind of distract me and calm me down. And I have a whole set of Agatha Christie novels. But as gone on through time, I always go back to the mystery genre as my go-to happy place.
What is it about that particular genre that you like? I mean, it's obviously a very popular genre. It's not for everyone. It's even become more popular, I guess, these days because of podcasts and things that are related, the real world crime part of it. I'm so fascinated with this particular genre. I like it. I wouldn't say I'm as obsessed with it as some other people, but why do you think this is an enduring genre in general to readers?
I think there's first of all, escapism, because many of these books are written in another time. Certainly the ones I like to read are written in another time. They're in a different society. So it's true escapism. And it's a good distraction from what we do in everyday life. But it's also, the whodunit. It's, going back to Sherlock Holmes, you're never going to solve it because, they throw in things at the very last minute, which I now understand and to a certain extent do. But it's fascinating how they come up with what they come up with. And to a certain point, as you kind of mentioned, there's the opportunity to learn different things along the way.
What did you learn along the way of this book?
That is, I'm having fun writing it. In the first book, the story is based on a movement I knew about. I don't know if you recall it, about the eternal winding system.
Oh, of course.
It's a winding system that was developed in the late 1990s, early 2000s by a Hungarian watchmaker who lived in Connecticut and had the Budapest Watch Company. And he developed this winding system where, let's take a step back, the Atmos clock made by JLC winds the movement by way of changes in barometric pressure, affecting a gas in its chamber that expands and contracts, and in so doing, winds the mainspring. What he did was he developed a bimetallic coil in the watch where he annealed two pieces of metal together, two different metals, and they expand and contract at different temperatures. And by so doing, with changes in temperature, theoretically, it would wind the mainspring. He actually was able to get it to work. He claimed that he had a movement, I think it was like for 60 days, running without touching it, was running perfectly with perfect amplitude. So his timekeeping should be good. And he was planning to case it and sell it for a hefty sum. And then he died. And all natural causes, nothing there. But then the movement disappeared. And I've always wondered why that movement disappeared. I now have a theory as to why it disappeared, but I'm not going to say it because that's at the end of the book. But I built a story around that. And so I got to explore it, and I found his patent application and was able to go through that and use a little of chemistry to learn a little bit about it. And it was just fun to explore.
What stops you, or maybe you will, from taking that story that you find interesting, that real world story, and just writing a story about what happened? Like there's one idea to take it and then base a fictional story around it. There's another idea of writing what you learned about it. You seemed interested in both sides of it. I'm curious as to why you decided to take this as a frame for a fictional story as opposed to saying this actually happened, and I'm curious as to what the result was, because it looks like both are mysteries.
True. It's easier to sit in my study and write than have to travel or find his progeny in Connecticut or wherever they may be to find out the true story. And, to a certain extent, I actually didn't realize or think about why that never came to fruition until I was into the book. And because I couldn't, I just, it was an interesting story, but I didn't have the need to know. I just said, well, his kids weren't interested in it, done. But I think there was more to it. And you know what? When you write a novel, you're always right.
So as you said, researching a fiction book is easier because you can just change the facts to suit what you want. The real life element of it, of course, is more difficult because you want to be factually correct and you want to be complete. You don't want to tell some of the story, not all of it. And I'm sure that you, as someone who's done research, you probably are a bit of a completionist. Once you get into a topic, you're not satisfied with talking about some of it. Even if you don't write about all of it, Mitch needs to understand all of it, right?
That's a fair statement. And when I get to writing the next nonfiction book, it's going to take a lot of work because, yeah, I want to write it right. I don't want to write a puff piece and just say, well, this is cute. No, why is it interesting? Without being mysterious, what I want to write is take a watch and have a watchmaker who built the watch and a collector who acquired the watch, and have them talk about the watch from different perspectives. And I think that would be an interesting experience. But to do that, one has to really understand the watch.
Yeah, yeah.
So they can ask the right questions. As you say, you've been doing this for a long time, so you can understand the questions. Sometimes it's not writing, it's the questions. Once you can get the questions answered and ask the right questions, because this kind of idea is going to have to happen multiple times, so you don't want it to be boring either.
I'll take it a step further in terms of where an idea like that can succeed and why it can be a good idea. And it goes back to the difference between personally understanding the watch on a mechanical level versus being intrigued by how much others are passionate about it, but not being able to understand or appreciate it through your own lens. And I've noticed that a lot of people, especially the mainstream, are attracted to watches as a hobby because someone else is really into it. Here's this individual who's really into their watch or watches in general or something like that. I don't understand it myself, but I'm curious to know what they see in it. And I see that as being a larger net, so to say, than an individual person identifying a value in watchmaking that they see. You and I are of that latter category. We did not need someone else in our life being excited to get excited about watches. But do you agree that for the mainstream, the average person out there, it usually requires humans as a vector into the hobby versus the object itself?
That's a complicated question because there's several different ways to answer that. First of all, I don't totally divorce myself from either of those categories because to this day, I'm learning about the watches I actually possess. There's parts that either I knew and forgot, which is not an impossibility, or I never knew. And it's fun to hear descriptions of watches that I have because there's maybe little elements. Oh, I've had this watch for a while. I didn't understand that. In a similar vein, I've been very fortunate to go meet with watchmakers, go to on factory tours and whatever. I would much rather go on a tour with a group of people, not a huge group, but a group of people than me alone, because you learn from others' questions. And sometimes those people ask questions that you don't think of, or I certainly don't think of. And having somebody ask a question that I didn't think of can only do one thing, and that is increase my understanding and knowledge and appreciation of what I'm looking at. So, and it works both ways. I'm sure I do the same thing for others. And I think that is, one should never be afraid to learn more about what you already have, as opposed to saying, oh, I know everything about this watch, let's move on. No, there's always an opportunity to learn more. And that's the joy of this. And having people who are new to the hobby versus us, OGs, I mean, they may ask questions you don't even think about. And it's beautiful. And the other way, when to your point, when I wrote the first book for my sons, as it came to fruition, I realized my goal for that book was a couple of fold. First of all, of course, it was for my sons and to educate them. But more, as importantly, I realized I have two goals with this book. One is to take the should out of buying, or acquiring watches, what should I get? And to your point, letting the world out there tell me what to get. Oh, get what you like. Get what appeals to you. Get what means something to you. And it could be a quote unquote inexpensive watch, or it could be a hugely expensive watch, but may have it mean something to you, not because some internet influencer or what have you tell you, oh, this is the watch to get. No. The second goal of this book is and was and is to have people tell their stories. I think we all have stories. To your point, the watches are more than just a mechanical device. They're an incredible device, but they're also art, but they also carry with them stories. And why did I get them? What does it mean to me? And it could be the simplest of watches, or it could be the most complicated watches, but what's the story behind it? What does it mean to you? And I think that's an important thing that I hope we get more of, because by telling our stories, again, it empowers other people to feel comfortable about getting what they love and what it means to them.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm hearing something interesting, and that is that the other people that you're around can tell you the questions that you should be asking. It's not about the answers. It's about these are the questions you should be asking. As you said, some of those questions, the other person's answer is irrelevant because that's for their own taste, their own personal experience. They're just helping you know what you should ask, and then you have to answer for yourself, and that ultimately leads to the personal type of passion. But oftentimes, when you see an object, you don't know what to ask about it. You may not have enough natural curiosity, or you just don't have enough context. But being around people like you, like me, like others, can teach other people what questions to personally ask as a way of finding personal admiration. It's not enough that you or I like it. And that's where I think it's important to say, don't buy something because someone told you to get it. It's ask the question that you should be asking. Other people will help you, but then you need to follow your path of creating your own answer. That's the only satisfying answer in many instances, is the one that you come up with.
Fair enough. I couldn't agree with you more. It's just you have to make your own way. It's just our responsibility to the hobby or whatever to help show you that it is okay. It is okay to take a divergence away from the popular ideas. It's fine.
Now, going back to Time Eternal, like I said, I still have some portion to get through, but I found that many instances in the book, you sort of lean heavily into conversations that watch lovers would find interesting. And I'm sure that you've had people who are not into watches at all look at it. And I'm wondering what their feedback has been. Is it too much watchy stuff? Is it not enough? I'm wondering what feedback they have for you in terms of the hobby being injected into this murder mystery.
The book has been out for a few weeks, and to that point, I am waiting for people to start telling me about it. I have a friend who emailed me. He knows nothing about watches, and he was one of my gentle readers. In other words, he read one of the first draft. And I remember we spent hours talking about that first draft. And he read the book now, and he again knows nothing about watches. And he said it was terrific.
Your descriptions are very good. The way that you take concepts and try to quickly explain them to a generalist audience, I was impressed by that. I mean, obviously you'd been around these concepts for a while, but as you know, that's a difficult skill to boil some of this stuff down into a few sentences.
Well, it helps working with an editor who knows nothing about watches.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, my wife is my first editor, and she knows more than she realizes about watches. But this book, before it was released, has been seen by 4 or 5 other people who know nothing about, who are editors of different types, a line editor, the main editor, the proofreader, and such, and they don't know anything about watches. So they helped create the story. And when we were going through it, and the second book's about to go to the editor next week, I said, the story is the story. You can't change the story, but help me make it better. And that's what they do. That's their job. They made it
absolutely.
better.
And what? Okay.
Well, just one thing, because I got to say this. Today, my wife was talking to her almost 95-year-old mother, who clearly knows nothing about watches. But she was very angry with me. And that was because she's reading my book and didn't go to sleep last night.
Oh.
So I take that as a really good thing. So my mother-in-law will say, yeah, I couldn't go to sleep last night. I was busy reading your book. No,
it moves along quickly. I mean, that's a really hard thing to do. Certain authors are excellent at it. I remember, I'm not such a prolific reader of fiction, but I remember Dan Brown was really, really good at like keeping the pages turning, right? Mm-hmm. Like very short and choppy, like very move on. I remember like, oh my God, like this is insane. Like this is so good how he just, like, because other books, like, they're like, I'm going to stay in this thought for a really long time, way longer than you want, reader, because I'm really enjoying this description of this scene. And the reader's like, oh gosh. And again, I think it's because of all the reading you've done that you have a natural intuition of how to pace things along.
Well, thank you. For me, it's where I spend my most time in preparing for a book is the first couple of pages.
Yeah.
Because if you don't get them on the first couple of pages, I mean, in this book, I killed somebody on the first page.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it took me 40 pages to figure out who I killed.
Oh, really? Well, yeah. And when you get into that part of it, yeah. And I like that you move around a little bit. Going back to the watch side of it, I want to say that you're not just name dropping, right? There's a lot of things where you're a hobbyist and they're like, oh, I'm going to throw a bunch of names and terms that only people familiar with this will do. I mean, there might be a little bit of that, but for the most part, you are genuinely explaining. You have in the story itself, we'll call them people that know about watches and people that don't know. And so you sort of have to explain in the narrative for these people that don't know, and then that naturally ties in the reader that doesn't know. And again, I just thought that that's a good part of it because you like assume, you're like, yeah, the reader's not going to understand this, so let me explain a little bit. And I just want to say I noticed that.
Well, thanks. I mean, my characters don't know anything about watches. There's only a few people who know anything about watches. And the supervillains, they may not know as much about watches as you think they do.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
It's. I mean, there's so many different sides of it, but it's fun working with people who are a little goofy and who don't know anything about watches, because then as the series will go on, they do develop a little bit of understanding. They're not going to be huge collectors. They may never have a watch, actually. But in the fourth novel, my hero's going to start hanging out at a few watch shops because he can't avoid it.
Now, are these recurring characters or are all these different universes?
No, it's a series. So I have, as I said, the next book's ready to go to the editor. I'm about 75% done with the third novel, and I have an idea for the fourth novel, which I'm desperately trying not to think about right now because I got to get done with the third, and I know I'm going to be working back on the second because it takes a lot of work, the editing process. Be that as may, the good guys are the same. It's okay.
So these characters will return.
Yeah, they all return. They return. The bad guys, of course, are different.
Right.
Each book.
Now, to me, the book has sort of two protagonists. And again, I'm not going to do any spoilers or for anyone that wants to read the book and learn it, but we'll talk a little bit about some of the things in the book. The one of them, the character who's, the John Harrison character, which again is going to be amusing for people that know watches, but yes, you chose that name. This character is autistic. Mm-hmm. And I think I understand why you wanted to do that. You wanted to explain a vector as to sort of the savantness and why they're into watches in the first place and stuff like that. You had to create some type of compelling reason. But talk a little bit about writing a character who has some type of a disability. Obviously, you come from the medical world. I have no idea what your knowledge is in autism or anything like that. My question is, did you have any personal experience with it from an educational or relationship standpoint, or did you have to sort of figure this out from scratch?
No, in the course of my professional career in medicine, I took care of a number of autistic kids. And
okay,
I may get myself into a little bit of trouble, but it's my bias that a number of watchmakers had that little bent. And because they spend their lives in a world the size of a postcard. Now, you've got to have a certain kind of a path of neurology to be able to be satisfied in that small environment. There may be lunatics outside of the, in a nice way, in a fun way, outside of the workshop, but when they can really narrow it down to this very, very small world of micromechanics and art. But I thought it would be fun and interesting to expand upon it, and it just worked. And I think it worked reasonably well, and he'll be a recurring character and slowly will come out of his shell. But it adds a different flavor to the story. And I like the John Harrison connection. I thought that was fun. And his dog, his therapy dog is Louis, for Abraham Louis Breguet. I mean, it was just fun. It was fun to create these characters and to live with them.
Mechanically, though, it seems difficult to understand the parameters because, again, there's a lot of famous characters out there that have, different types of, honestly, I'll call them personality accessories. That's really what they are. Something that gives them more character, makes the interactions more interesting, whether it's a flaw or some type of physical attribute or something in their personality. Throughout all of literary history, this has been a common theme. The problem, it seems, with certain types, and they have a broken leg, you understand the parameters of that. Autism, by definition, is something on the spectrum. So it can be very difficult to determine what this person will say, what they won't say, how they will react. And I at least me, putting myself in your shoes, trying to write a character like that, I could see that as being really, really hard. And I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit more about, because it's a major character, right? They're in a lot of scenes, and you have to make them convincing. You have to show real limitations, but of course, real humanity. I'm just wondering how interesting or difficult that was for you. If you could talk a little bit about that process.
My wife was also in the medical profession, and she worked with some autistic kids as well. And so we had a number of interesting discussions about it as the book was being written. And she would say, nah, he wouldn't say that. Or, yeah, okay, you can go there. I mean, this was a collaborative effort because you really have to be careful, because you don't want to box them into this thing of, oh, this is, somebody who doesn't speak or whatever. Because again, you said the magic word, it's a spectrum. And so where on the spectrum does he fall at this minute? But things can change. And as you'll see in the course of the book, he opens up a little, he expands, and there's reasons why he is the way he is. Some of it having to do with his neurodevelopmental issues, but others because of the circumstance in which he grew up. The other main protagonist almost becomes a father figure to him because he doesn't have that in his life, sort of.
Yeah. I'll give you, I have a lot of feedback. I'll keep most of it until I'm specifically asked. But I think one piece of feedback that was interesting for me to think about in that character is wanting to see a personal struggle. I don't know as much about the world of autism as you do, but I find that the reader probably has a question. Does the person having this, do they struggle? Are they trying to be more communicative and they fail? Or are they quite comfortable in their more narrow world? And rather than try to interact with other people, they're like, I'm perfectly happy not, leave me alone, I'm bored. And I wanted to see a little bit more of that. That's pretty advanced stuff, but I'm just simply saying I was so engaged. I thought it'd be interesting to ask that question of what was going on in this person's mind. Again, I don't know too much about it if there's this awareness, like, oh, I wish I could talk more, but I'm having trouble doing it. But do you see what I mean?
Yeah, no, I would say it's just the reverse. I don't want to talk because of anxiety or because of rigidity. It's all about rigidity and about, in this character, in this stage of his existence, his fictional existence, he is used to a very regimented life, and in that degree of the spectrum, in that area of the spectrum, that is actually comforting. If you diverge from that area of comfort, then you get anxiety. You get, and I don't know if you've gotten to the part where they meet with a psychologist, and she talks about you don't want to set him up to have a meltdown.
Yeah, I was recently reading that part.
Yeah, and because that's what it is. I mean, they can have these meltdowns because of anxiety and because of inability to express themselves. Now, I am by no means an autism expert, but I've observed them, and I feel, quite frankly, that it is a fair description. But to go any deeper into that, I think that there's not the insight in the character. But I also don't feel like I'm qualified to get into his brain and say what he really thinks. He's relating to the outside world on his terms, and the other protagonist is bringing him out slowly, is trying to help him. But it's a long. I mean, he's been at this for 20 some odd years.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just an interesting thing to think about, because you have someone who lives this regimented life, and in a safe environment, they can thrive. But oftentimes, when there's crisis, that rigidity, that structure needs to be broken. And it's that discomfort which people tend to like reading about in literary characters. You throw someone in a bad situation, oh, I want to see what happens. For someone like that, you're having this murder mystery and all that. All these are circumstances which pushes you out of your comfort zone, makes your routine less viable for a period of time. And it's interesting to see in your story, the world kind of coddles this kid, right? The world is like, okay, we're just going to go by his rules. And that's not always possible. World cannot always be tolerant and sympathetic and accommodating. Sometimes someone with a limitation is, faced with a very rigid world that will not allow them to live their preferred, lifestyle within it. And that, again, I think from a literary perspective is interesting to explore.
True. But again, without giving away much of the story, it is enabled in the story to keep him. And to a certain degree, it benefits people to keep him in that situation.
Yeah, and I'm just saying it's such a wonderful thing, because even though we're talking about a fake story, we're talking about real issues, right?
Oh,
because
yeah, for sure.
You want to be believable. And that's, I think, the hardest thing for me. I don't know that I would ever do good being that type of author, because I think what I realize, and I think what you and others pick up on after reading this type of genre for so many years, is it's not just about the plot. It's about choosing enough details to make the world feel real without having too many details to box in the characters, to bore the reader. It's telling just enough without telling too much. And that mix is where the art is, but also what I find the most difficult. Because I would go on insanely long explanations and, 100 pages into it, nothing's happened.
I had the reverse fear. I had the fear. Well, no, it's not reverse. I had the concern when the book was done in its first draft that it was very black and white. In other words, I'm telling the story, there it is, but there wasn't enough color in the story to explain the world about us, not just, he went here and there and did this and did that, and this person, dead. It was, and I said that to the editor, to the official editor, and to a certain extent to my wife. I said, the story I want, but I need help doing the color, because writing this book is a completely different experience than writing the first book. The first book's easy in a sense because it's my story. Just sit down and you do it. Obviously, it had to be edited. Obviously, it had to be made readable. But that was easy. This creating a new world out of a piece of paper or a computer screen was much more of a challenge. But it was fascinating to happen. The whole creative process was amazing to me. And I'm not trying to be self-congratulatory at all, but it was like, wow, how did that happen? I did something on page whatever. Now, 100 pages later, that comes into play. And I didn't realize it would when I created it the first time. So the whole process is fun. But then when you sit down, the draft is done, then you got to make sure it's colored. And there has to be, to your point, enough color in there so there's context. And so you feel it's humans you're reading about, not automatons.
Now, you're still relatively new in writing about your hobby, right? You're not specifically writing about your hobby, but your hobby is there. And there's a lot of things that you probably realize you want to talk about. Maybe when you wrote your first book, you started to realize it and you're like, wow, I have certain ideas I'm curious about and want to talk about beyond just describing why I like this watch or why I bought it. And you start to do that a little bit. You start to talk about some of the politics in the industry. You start to talk about what you appreciate and how watches are made. You start to talk about those mechanical things that most interest you. Talk a little bit about the experience of taking this passion, but also using it to create flourish in a world, right? Because you love it, and ultimately there's got to be some way you can connect with other people. I guess the question is, did you find it hard to take the things you find so passionate, interesting, and then translate that into things that other people might find interesting to try to create bridges between what you find fascinating and what the reader might find fascinating?
A long time ago, somebody said, you write about what you know. And I was a physician for quite a number of years. I find that boring. I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, got a sweatshirt, don't need anything more. And it didn't interest me. This interests me because really, there's so many facets of this that still need to be explored. Again, you're experiencing the first book. When you experience, should you have the interest, in the second book and soon to be the third book, you'll see that there's different aspects of the watch world that I'm writing about and killing people in, which is absolutely hysterical. My wife said to me, and I probably shouldn't say this, but you're writing about things that annoy you in the watch world. And this book is about the corporate meanderings and, high finance and all that. Then the next book is more about the gray market and Franken watches and that kind of thing. The third book has to do with a museum robbery and something completely different, but it's a story that we all know about. But I've gone totally off the ranch with that one. It's fun.
No, it's great. And I guess that's why I'm excited by it, because the things that you think about, struggle with, you're probably not alone. Mm-hmm. But it's the type of thing that watch people don't often talk about. And I'll give sort of a small illustration to prove my point, hopefully. You are part of certain social groups to talk about watches, and you go there because you want to have hardcore discussions about watches. But I've noticed how these groups tend to devolve. And I'll give you an example. Let's say like a WhatsApp group. I'm part of certain WhatsApp groups that I've been asked to join. Some of them massive, lots of people, very important people. They all devolve into one activity and one activity only. Hey, look at what's on my wrist today. Mm-hmm. Right? And I very quickly get bored and realize no one here is talking about anything actually difficult. No one's asking any serious questions. No one's saying, have you noticed this? No one's saying, I'm excited about this process. It just boils down to, look what I have that you probably don't. And I can imagine that a book like yours, if successful, will prompt people to ask more serious questions rather than, have you worn or do you own one of these? Because I think that there's this potential for collectors to inspire and educate one another. But the reality is, if it's the wrong type of people, the wrong context, it just devolves into something really, really boring, right?
Short answer, yes. I was talking to somebody recently, or listening to, I was listening to an interview, and they said that 90% of watch purchases are done because of not what the watch means to me, but what it means to everybody else. Look to your point, what I have. And
status signaling.
In that regard, yes. And I think it's incumbent upon people like yourself who have a voice, who have an audience, to try to reinvigorate the conversation about what a watch is, what differentiates one watch from another, either on the artistic way or the technical way or the finishing way, whatever it takes, but to put more, not so much academics, but understanding in what it is rather than what it shows. And I think it's incumbent upon you, I'll toss it back to you, and others who have these insightful writings and podcasts and videos and whatever, to try to encourage that conversation. I think it's very difficult. People are very busy. I think they're busier and busier and busier, and there's so much distraction. It's just a heck of a lot easier to say, hey, look what I got, and then move on, rather than spending the time and investing the time in trying to understand. Now, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that watches are becoming more ingrained into the zeitgeist of younger people. More people are getting tired of having technology on their wrist, looking for something. And maybe in time, they'll get tired of saying, well, I have X, Y, and Z watch that everybody else has. I want to understand why I should have something else, or why something else attracts me. Maybe we haven't gotten there yet with this greater people. Because when you and I started, we were a small community. We were really, under the radar. Now it's much more in the open, and take the influencers away, take the celebrities away, but let's have some serious conversations. And I think that can only do good. But to be part of that, however, people need time.
I look at sort of the traditional reason why a college was created, like a long, long time ago, and that was basically a bunch of curious people who recognized that they ended up figuring more stuff out when they spoke together than alone. Mm-hmm. And when you have a bunch of very serious watch enthusiasts, what you find is that the more time they spend in the hobby, the more questions they have, the more curious they are. They actually feel in a lot of ways like they know less, even though they end up knowing a lot. And to answer the remaining questions they have, these are often very difficult questions. They can really only do them in a group environment where they can share experiences, and this guy knows this and this other guy knows this. And together, through discussion and debate and exploration, they come to a greater understanding. And the enthusiast, when in this conversation with a novice who cannot understand these issues or help solve these questions, is just kind of frustrated. Like, oh, you don't get it at all. Maybe you will, but you don't get it at all. I'm not interested in telling you what to buy. I need to know about what the best finishing is. And so I think that's why you have these collector communities who stick together, because the goal that they serve is this very high level of understanding. Because as we understand, the industry is dense. It doesn't always want to tell you its secret, so to say. It's happy to tell you one message, but not others. I mean, behind me, for example, there's a book by Audemars Piguet. Actually, not a bad book. But if you look at the book at face value, it basically says Audemars Piguet is the master and specialist of everything in watchmaking. And while they do a lot of stuff, as many companies do, they're not the only ones, right? If you just looked at that, you'd be like, wow, Audemars Piguet invented all this stuff. Well, no, not really. They just sort of have it through their own lens. And so the point is, if you learn about watches and the watch industry through the brands, you're getting a very curated look. Let's put it that way. You have to go off and have like a guerrilla journey, with your fellow soldiers in the jungle, figuring stuff out to be a real master. You can't just use a lot of the established marketing material out there. You can't listen to the auction houses. If anything, the slicker the content, the less trustworthy it is in many instances.
Absolutely agree with you. And when you talk about collecting in general, a lot of collecting is easy. It doesn't require much, in the sense that when I was a kid, I collected coins. My father was a stamp collector. That doesn't take much. It really doesn't take much to be a true collector, because there's an empty spot in your album. You need to find a stamp to fill that spot. Yeah, there's different qualities and whatever, but here, where there's just thousands of options, not millions of options, it takes a lot more time and energy to really understand it. And it's just easier. Tell me what to say. Tell me what to get, because I don't have the bandwidth. I don't have the interest. I get bored. Too much technology, too much, too many variables. It's just easier if you, whoever, tell me what to say. And I think we need to dumb it down a little bit. I've been around over the course of years with various enthusiasts who can tell you everything down to what the size the screw is.
But no context is why it's cool.
Well, no, or even so. But, it's just so much overwhelming. But the more you expose yourself, you're not going to understand everything. But the more you are exposed, the more, and hear things 1, 3, 8 times, the more you get to understand what it is that makes these devices so special. And not to be afraid to ask the same question over and over and over again, and not to be intimidated by somebody who knows a lot more than you, because you may not understand everything, but you may understand a little bit. And then that grows. It can be fostered over time. You're not going to understand watches day one. Just not. It's just not going to happen. And whether it takes 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, or a lifetime, there's still the questions to ask.
So notice this trend, and this is something I, as a media person, it's not that I struggle with. It's just an interesting phenomenon. What you're saying is absolutely true. Education is a process. No one's an expert on day one. Yet the internet and a lot of the content that is promoted by the algorithms, which have you believe the exact opposite, the ultimate guide, everything you need to know, the best, right? We are constantly being delivered media, which is so conclusive in its finality that consumers are led to believe you can learn everything in one article from one video. This is everything you need to know. That is the whole story. Now, practically speaking, that's total BS. Yet consumers have to jump through all these hoops and everything like that just to get to this point. We were sort of grown up saying, like, you don't know everything, you have to keep learning. But the internet, again, for complicated reasons that are not really intentional, supports content that would have you believe the otherwise. And people who just get into the hobby for the first few years are told this is everything you need to know. There oftentimes isn't even a hint that there's a deeper world. They sometimes have to find out it by accident or uncomfortably realize that watch they thought was amazing is not that great. But do you see how it's kind of an interesting uphill battle against some of the powers that be in mainstream media?
Yes. I also think it is the way of the world where we look for the instantaneous piece of information. The internet is 20 seconds, you get this 20-second reel or whatever it is, and that you want to get all the information from there. To learn means taking time. And, the person with autism who has also severe ADD is never going to be a watchmaker. It's the person who can, sweat the details. That's going to be the watchmaker. And to a lesser extent, the collector, I think in your view and in my view, needs to invest some time. And some of the acquisitions are going to be solely and exclusively done on an emotional basis. And others are going to be researched. Sometimes people think too much. Sometimes they don't think enough. But it all boils down to, Ariel, if you buy a watch, you in general, not you in specific, and it gives you joy, what more is there? You don't even have to understand what that screw is about or what those hands are, whatever. If it gives you joy, because it gives you joy, not somebody else, to me, that's it in a nutshell. That if one person gets a message from me that says, I'm going to buy this because it gives me joy, I have done my job.
But determining what gives you joy is hard. To figure out where to put your money and how to actually give you happiness is difficult. And the tendency is something will give you some joy or temporary joy. And then you're like, uh-oh, I need to buy more watches to feel that complete sense of joy that I'm hunting.
Well, unfortunately, I wish, certainly my wife would wish that, one watch did it or fit it all. And unfortunately, it hasn't, and it's still going. She was really hoping that when I retired that I would cut it back. And when I told my sons, what I've acquired since the book came out, they said, so, volume 2? It's like, well, we'll see. But, it's a complicated story. But if you buy what you like, if you acquire what you like, if you come to my house, and you looked around my house, we have art on our walls. You may look in and go, don't get it. No. Yeah, okay, whatever. I don't care. These pieces of art, many of which I cannot explain to you why, but they, to this day, having had them for 30 years, they still give me joy. That to me, how did I get there? Because I kissed a lot of frogs. You have to kiss a lot of frogs. You can't walk into a watch store, see the first watch, and be confident that that's the watch for you for the rest of your life or whatever. Yeah, I don't have the first watch I ever bought. I think if I listed the first 10 watches I purchased, I probably only have a couple.
Right.
But since then, the vast majority of watches, the overwhelming number of watches I have accumulated are still with me, and I can't give them up. I can't, because they have those memories. They have that impact, and they still give joy.
This is a good segue to our last line of questions we have time for, and that has to do with some of your perceptions of the industry that you've helped enrich. You've bought some very fine timepieces. You've definitely sponsored some brands, and we'll call it that. Yet when you read Time Eternal, your descriptions of the people in Europe, the Swiss and Switzerland and Geneva, are in tones that I find familiar because I'm frustrated with them. But I think a lot of other watch enthusiasts look at that region and a lot of those business people through rosier glasses. As someone who's done a lot of business with the Swiss, you have a deserved cynical perspective. You don't necessarily see them as being particularly forthright. Yes, you are leaning into, a certain type of stereotype. You're having villains, but in general, you don't seem to have a lot of love for the region. And I'm with you on this, right? We're in the same camp here. But talk a little bit about the residual feelings you have of the Swiss. You've been there many times. You've done business with, not just Swiss brands, people from other parts of Europe, but it's an interesting takeaway to see that despite your patronage, you also have a lot of reservations about supporting a lot of their values and the culture that helps produce these things. And again, I am your friend in these conclusions.
Wow, this is I could get myself into a lot of trouble.
That's the point of the show.
Actually, the whole the company that I discuss, really, I just had a lot of fun with that. And in fact, there is a brother and sister, a company that is run by a brother and sister.
I know who you mean.
Yeah. And they know about the book. I saw them long before the book came out. And I had to reassure them that it was not them. And the wife of the brother, I was telling her about it. We were laughing about it. I said, I just want you to understand that it's not you guys. And she said, well, do they have any children? I said, no. She said, okay, you're good. So it was, but I think out of it comes the conservatism. And, whenever there's corporate, I think you look at Switzerland and you can make up a lot of stories because the world of watchmaking, the corporate watchmaking is very opaque. And I think it lends themselves to fiction because you can't write something and, the general population saying, well, that doesn't ever happen. Well, how do you know? Because you don't know what happens in the boardrooms. I've been in those rooms, and I've actually, another one of my friendly readers who has been in those kind of meetings says, yeah, you got it. I mean, I know the personalities. I know how some of these people think. And you're around long enough, you see how individuals relate and how the companies relate and how what they say on one hand is not really what happens on the other. So it really does lend itself to having fun with it. And I certainly am very careful. I don't call out the brands by name because I don't want to create something that isn't there or insinuate that there's something there because this is all fiction. In the next book, I also talk about boutiques, but I don't name the boutiques. And the jewelry store I create in there is based on what I know, but it is totally a fictional environment, shall I say. But I again, knowing how opaque this thing is and knowing that it is a luxury brand that is basically trying to sell their goods as being better than anything else, it's easy. If you don't know what's going on behind the screen, you can say anything you want. You can make it up and really make it sound good.
I just think there's two important takeaway messages here. One is, as someone who's a seasoned collector, your takeaway is not the rosiest one of the industry. You send a lot of, red flags that people should be aware of. So I think there's actual legitimate warnings in there. And I think the second thing is feedback to the Swiss. They need to hear more of this. Your interactions with them for quite a number of years and spending a lot of money with them has led you to be quite skeptical about them trying to exploit you and others and not being particularly honest a lot. That should be something they look at and be like, wait a minute, this is our reputation. Because yes, you exaggerate a little bit, you dramatize, absolutely. But at the end of it is this person who is writing this book with this overall frame of watches because you love watches, but you don't really have a huge amount of positive things to say about some of the people that treat you there. And you touch them in a lot of things. Their silly secrecy, the fact that they really are trying to screw other people over and exploit them. Some of their, the way they feel about people from other countries and things like that. Some of their focus on how they treat people, customer service. Like these are real feelings you have. You're not trying to hide them. You're trying to send maybe subtle hints to them like, hey, work on this. But people like yourself should be the first line of feedback. The brands should be trying to make you happy first and foremost. And one of the things I've noticed over the last 2-3 years is a very big difference from 10 years ago, where you and other high-spending collectors are souring on a lot of the relationships with the brands. This is not just you. It's many, many people from around the planet who are all coming to me quite angry and upset with particular brands they were loyal to, And what I see is a wholesale situation where brands are pushing people, exploiting people, treating them in ways that belie the type of customer service experience you'd think was going on in the background. And for me, it's not your problem, but you're sending them a signal that there's a problem they have. And you said their personality is probably the one that they'll never necessarily work into it. But I do think that there's some important lessons for the Swiss to take away in the subtext of what you're saying. That's just my opinion.
I love the Swiss. I think the Swiss are wonderful people. I think anybody who touches a watch is a phenomenally wonderful human being, and I love interacting with. No, I mean, you know, they have a job to do. I get it. I'm not going to sit here or anywhere and tell them how to do their job. I do think that I agree with you. I think that we might have a different take on what they or how they see their mission in life. But, you know, face it, they're trying to sell a product that we don't need, really, if you come right down to it. So how do they develop this exclusivity, and how do they build their market? I mean, I'm not going to tell them. I'm not a marketing genius. I know what I like. I know how I'd like to be treated. I have been treated, and I'm not saying this because of what you said, I have been treated very royally at times, and other times not so much so. And I've been frustrated by some decisions that have been made. But I'm not sitting in the boardroom, and I'm not looking at all the variables. And we have to understand that. I think that, again, the opacity is frustrating, and the marketing hype is bothersome, because I believe in honesty. I really do. I think, tell me the honest truth about your watch and make a good product, and I think the product will sell itself, rather than creating this mysticism around a product that doesn't really deserve it. I mean, that would be how I would leave it. Just my cynicism in writing, yeah, some of it may be unconscious, but who wants to read a murder mystery where everybody's getting along?
Oh, I agree. And like I said, I had a lot of fun with the characters. I will, of course, finish the book. I only had it about a week, so I should be forgiven for not finishing it. But I did enjoy the majority of the book, which I've read so far, which is Time Eternal. Mitch, tell everyone where they can get the book and maybe learn more about you on the internet.
The best place is Amazon, or essentially any online bookseller you can get the book either digitally, or it's paperback or hardcover. Amazon has a nice summary of me. I don't know, on Instagram, it's uniquely prototype, and so I'm posting there as well. You can get me through Mitch at Tasfil.com. That's TASFIL.com. That's the publisher. I'm around, but Amazon's probably the best place to start.
Wonderful. This has been the Superlative Podcast interview with watch collector and author Mitch Katz. Mitch, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Ariel. It's been a lot of fun.